This is the only way to play PlayStation games. You can't change my mind. No, you're not.
Yeah, you can. You can. Because the PC does it better. You
always say PC does it better.
Yeah, it does it better than it does.
You think it's better. You think it's better.
Shut up!
This is how you play PlayStation games.
Oh, piss off! You think that's better? That bomb's so hard. That bomb's so hard. Everyone's working. You know what?
What?
So much for having an opinion. Back in September of 1995, Sony released the PlayStation in North America and Europe, then finally 2 months later here in Australia. And unlike its rival, the Sega Saturn, it was instantly successful. The Sega Saturn was released 4 months ahead of schedule to cut into the sales of the PlayStation. However, this resulted in only 80,000 units being sold in that timeframe. Sony, however, sold over 100,000 PlayStations in the first 48 hours. It was also cheaper than the Saturn. Ouch. The Sega Saturn would then be discontinued in 1998, while the PlayStation lived on for another 8 years, until it was discontinued in March of 2006. Over 102 million consoles were sold up to that point. The PlayStation was, and is, an amazing piece of hardware with awesome features for the time. The ability to play your audio CDs, the best 3D capabilities of any console from that time period, and an awesome boot up sound that is so epic, I had to use it to hype myself up before matches.
Singles match, set for one fall.
2 years after the PlayStation's release, PlayStation emulators began appearing on the internet. Unfortunately, they suffered from compatibility and performance problems, and didn't really provide any improvements over the original hardware. But that all changed when 2 companies released PlayStation emulators for purchase in stores. Kinectix released the Kinectix Virtual Game Station, and Bleem released, well, Bleem. Sony ultimately purchased the Kinectix Virtual Game Station and discontinued the product, and Bleem eventually went out of business. But that wouldn't be the end of PS1 emulation, because in 2000, a small team of developers released the well-known PSX emulator, and it remained the #1 choice for PS1 emulation for nearly 20 years. Until a couple of years ago when a new PlayStation emulator made its way into the scene known as DuckStation, where it quickly became the #1 choice for PS1 emulation for users, bringing in both new and improved features. But before that, there was the PlayStation Classic, a mini version of the PlayStation released by Sony, with loads of hype behind it, especially after the huge success of Nintendo's NES Mini, SNES Mini, and Sega's Genesis Mini. However, it unfortunately only had a short lifespan on store shelves, and I'll get to the reason for that later on. So the main thing that I plan to look at in today's video is what is the best way to experience PlayStation 1 games in 2022 heading into 2023. The original hardware, an emulation solution from Sony themselves, or another emulation solution from a homebrew developer. Well, in order to find that out, we must play some games. But before we do that, there's a little bit of business I need to take care of.
Let's talk. Mr. Metal's heard just about enough. He's going to take on both members of the Untouchables.
Good luck to him, because that's a feat in its own. But he certainly seems to be proving it. He can do it.
Nice step up in security there. Oh, down.
Get rid of him. Get rid of him.
Oh, Ryan Allen's been eliminated.
Ryan Allen has been eliminated.
I mean, obviously these guys got in first in the Untouchables. But how unfortunate, if Ryan Allen had hung on just a little longer, the tide may have turned with 2 versus 2.
Troop Bishop's not happy with the fact that their plan has now gone out the window.
That is insurmountable odds. But you know what? He looks like he's just going to give it a good old-fashioned try.
Look, that's all you can do, but I I feel bad for anyone who's entering this rumble with these two here now. You literally have a tag team against you, and it's not only a tag team, but possibly the best tag team in the country. And oh, Jordan Bishop just got German suplex damn near out of his boots.
Well, that time was more successful.
That's how
The fact
Jordan Bishop has been eliminated.
that we've been on a roll.
For the love of Mario, how stupid can one person be? All Ryan had to do was just last 60 seconds. That's it. And then I could have got out there, helped them out, and we could have been the final two in that Rumble match, just as we planned it. And then, one half of Metal 64, me, could have gone on to main event Reawakening 21. But no, he had to be an absolute idiot, show off, and get himself eliminated, which in turn got me eliminated as soon as I got out there. Of all tag team partners I've ever had, Ryan Allen is the stupidest, dumbest motherfucker!
Anyway, let's just completely forget that Rumble ever happened and move on with the rest of the video. And we'll start things off with the original hardware. So I've connected my PlayStation to my capture card using the Pound HD link cable for the PS2 that is also compatible with the PS1. It's not the best, as there are definitely better solutions out there, but for the price I got it for, it does a good enough job, and is a hell of a lot better than this HDMI converter here. Here's a quick comparison. Now onto the games. The PlayStation is home to awesome titles that not only do a great job of showing off the graphical capabilities of the console, but also push the hardware to its limits without ruining the gameplay. Graphical masterpieces like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon have brilliant colour vibrancy that still pop to this very day. And even the gameplay itself still holds up really nicely. Crash Bandicoot is easily one of the absolute best 3D platformers of all time, while Spyro is a very popular, enjoyable, and well-made open world experience, and both of these games need to be in your collection. Gran Turismo took the racing genre by storm when it released, offering realistic driving mechanics that at the time had never been experienced before. And when you pair that with the steering wheel and the pedal set, the experience becomes even more realistic, and if you had one at that time, you became one of the cool kids. Playing multiplayer with the wheel and pedal set was just so cool back then that it felt like having an arcade in your living room. There was even a great selection of horror games on the PlayStation as well, the standouts being Resident Evil and Silent Hill. Both titles revolutionized the horror genre, and what made that even better is that both games were different from each other. One was full of tension, suspense and surprises, while the other messed with your mind with puzzle-solving riddles, changing of environments, and just downright making you feel very uneasy. Silent Hill also pushes the PlayStation hardware to its limits, as there are slowdowns present, although thankfully they are not too common. While the controls for both games unfortunately haven't aged well, it doesn't change the fact that Resident Evil and Silent Hill are one of the most highly sought after horror games on the PlayStation that need a place on your shelves. Technical powerhouses like Metal Gear Solid and Siphon Filter are a great example of console optimization, especially back then. Both games push the hardware to its limits while hardly sacrificing the visuals, and performance drops are very low. Metal Gear Solid is perhaps the best stealth action game on the PlayStation with a great story behind it. It definitely can be a rollercoaster ride and sometimes makes you feel like you're watching a movie rather than playing a game.
I gave in to my pain. I sold your life to save my own. I'm a loser. I'm not the hero you thought I was. I'm nothing.
God damn it, I got something in my eye. While Siphon Filter is another great action-adventure game that became very popular very quickly. PlayStation Magazine was quoted about this game saying, "Cross Metal Gear Solid with Tomb Raider and you might get this." And honestly, I can see that. Stealth elements combined with great action is a dead giveaway of that. And there's even elements of GoldenEye in this game too. Both of these titles in my opinion are definitely must-haves that if you don't have them in your collection yet, go out and buy them now. I promise you, you will not regret it. So there is still loads of fun that can be had on the PlayStation 1 heading into 2023, and a decent number of these games have surprisingly aged pretty well from one aspect or another, either visuals or the gameplay itself. There were some noticeable frame rate drops on the more demanding games, which is expected, but they mostly occurred in areas such as cutscenes for example that didn't have a negative effect on the gameplay experience. Today, PlayStation 1s can be picked up anywhere between 50 and 100 Australian dollars from either eBay or retro game shops. And they are definitely worth adding to your collection. It really is an amazing machine with awesome accessories like the multi-tap, the steering wheel, light guns, the analog stick, the mouse, vibrating controllers, the pocket station, all of which that were both evolutionary and revolutionary. The 90s was definitely an amazing time to be a gamer. Now let's move on to the PlayStation Classic. Earlier I said this console had a short lifespan on store shelves, and there is a few reasons for that. The blurry image and sluggish performance to name a couple. The included games also received negative attention, but honestly, I feel that they were judged a little bit too harshly. A nice selection of my favourites are included on this thing. But the games that really made the PlayStation the console that it was, like Gran Turismo and Crash Bandicoot for example, were nowhere to be found. 3 hours after the PlayStation Classic was released, it was already hacked open. And in fact, modifying it can lead to a much better experience than the system offers out of the box. The ability to play more PlayStation games via USB thumb drive is a really nice addition. But that comes with a caveat. If you live in a PAL region like I do here in Australia, right out of the gate with some titles where the speed of the game is tied to the frame rate, there will be timing and synchronization issues. Games such as Crash Bandicoot for example will either run about 18% faster than they should, while other games such as Spyro the Dragon will experience audio desynchronizations.
Thank you for releasing me, Spyro. Free 10 dragons in the artisan world. Then find the balloonist. He'll transport you to the next world.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
Find dragons first.
The PSX Rearmed emulator in here will run PAL games in NTSC mode by default. To fix this, hold select and press the triangle button to load up the emulator settings and change the region of the game to PAL. And after doing that, the problem just beep, disappeared like a poor kid's dad who went out to buy cigarettes.
Thank you for releasing me, Spyro. Free 10 dragons in the artisan world. Then find the balloonist. He'll transport you to the next world.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
Find dragons first. That's all I can tell you.
There's even a setting here to overclock the system's CPU for additional performance gains. It's set to 57 by default, but switching this to 100 can easily make the gaming experience a much smoother one. Here's a look at some of the best examples.
What is this? What's going on here? Was I dreaming?
How do you feel?
Oh, like I've been run over by a truck. But I'm alright, I guess.
Glad to hear it.
Now the overclock can go higher than this. I just left it at 100 as it was the best setting for me, as the games I loaded up so far don't benefit from any values set over that. It won't increase every PlayStation game's frame rate, and in some cases it can actually cause some of these games to not run properly. So just consider this as another option in the bag that could possibly make the gaming experience a much smoother one. There were many other options on here to play around with, along with the ability to add more emulators including the PlayStation Portable and the Sega Dreamcast. But that will be for another video. Now unfortunately, because of its short lifespan, PlayStation Classics now cost about 50% more, or in some cases over double the amount that it cost when it first came out. Yikes. And because of that, it's pretty hard for me to recommend something at that price point that's going to have to be modified to get the best out of it. Even though the PlayStation Classic does have its perks, unfortunately the negatives outweigh the positives. And now this leads to the PC. Just to show that you don't need an expensive gaming computer to play games like these, I'm using my oldest and weakest computer in my collection. Equipped with the Core 2 Duo E7500 CPU, 4GB of DDR3 RAM and a GT 1030. definitely far from special. However, with PlayStation emulation being as strong as it is for the last 2 decades, it can run on just about anything, from a budget Android device to a Raspberry Pi. And with the release of DuckStation, PS1 emulation has been taken to the next level, and I dare say can even offer a better experience than the last 2 systems can. For starters, unlike the PlayStation Classic, it doesn't matter if your region is PAL or NTSC. Any game you load up won't have any speed, timing or synchronization problems. It'll correctly determine the game's region and run it as it should. The settings menu is pretty user friendly in my opinion, giving detailed explanations as to which option does what and giving a recommended action if you're unsure of what to do with it. Right out of the gate with all settings at default, DuckStation runs great with no issues indicated and performance overall is very smooth. Pretty impressive stuff, especially on hardware as old as this. But now, let's make things even better. Even though they weren't too bad, there was still some frame rate dips that were indicated, so first, let's apply a small 50% overclock to smooth out those dips. Next, we'll switch the API render to Vulkan, as this will give us the best performance with higher resolutions and other enhancements. And speaking of which, set the internal resolution scale from 1x to 5x, the equivalent of 1080p. And now we'll tick the true color rendering box that will disable dithering and give better looking gradients. Now for those who don't know, dithering is an effect on the PlayStation that applies a pattern between 2 colors to simulate a third color. And the best example to showcase this is Silent Hill. As you can see, it's absolutely everywhere. And true color rendering eliminates the dither patterns and natively displays the correct colors to clean up the image. Now dithering is not noticeable on higher resolutions, so turning this setting on or off is entirely up to your personal preference. And finally, we'll enable chroma smoothing. And as you can see, the end result is definitely night and day. But it isn't perfect. Yet. Notice the wobble and distortion around things like character models in Silent Hill, the lines on the road in Gran Turismo, and the train tracks in Siphon Filter here for example. Now that is where geometry correction comes in, and this is where DuckStation completely stands out from other PS1 emulators that I've ever used. It effectively reduces the wobble and texture warping that we all often see in PS1 titles. So now that geometry correction is enabled, the lines on the road in Gran Turismo are no longer a flickery mess just popping in and out. The character models and other objects in Silent Hill are no longer distorted beyond belief, and the train tracks here in Siphon Filter no longer look like they're going to cause a derailment. And overall, everything in general just looks and feels a lot smoother as you play. It really does breathe some new life into these old games. So now with all those settings enabled along with geometry correction, DuckStation now runs and looks fantastic. The visuals that are presented here are just simply unmatched. It is so good. And guess what? I have a little surprise up my sleeve. Swapping out the Core 2 Duo CPU with this Core 2 Quad Q6600 that I recently picked up now allows us to experience PS1 games in beautiful native 4K with no signs of slowdown indicated. And when we compare the price of this configuration to the PlayStation Classic, in my opinion, it effectively makes this the no-brainer option, especially when you can get newer Optiplexes off of eBay for a much cheaper price. Blech. Good thing I managed to get this Optiplex for free. PlayStation 1 emulation has gotten so good over the years, it's now at a point where it's hard to imagine what developers will do to make it even better. But I guess we'll just have to wait to see what the future brings. So now what exactly are the pros and cons with all the 3 platforms? Well first, let's start off with the PlayStation itself. The first pro is that the games just work. You grab a game, you put it in, you hit the power button, and you're playing. That's it. No configuration, no compatibility list, no nothing. Pro number 2, replacement parts are still being manufactured to this very day. So if something like the laser or even the power supply were to fail on you, going on eBay and grabbing a cheap brand new replacement is extremely easy. And speaking of which, I'll be having a video coming out about this power supply very soon, so stay tuned for that. And pro number 3, the modding community on the PlayStation is absolutely brilliant, with mod chips that allow you to play backup or imported games still being made today, and with great new additions like the PS1 Digital, an HDMI mod for the PlayStation really does breathe some new life into this old beast. And because it's tapping directly into the PS1's motherboard, the image quality is absolutely amazing. And as great as all that sounds, unfortunately, this is where the cons come in. Modifications like these can be pretty expensive, and since they will require experience with microsoldering, they are not for the beginner modder. So if you have little to no soldering skills like I do, you would have to get someone else to do the mod for you, which can then increase the price even further. And believe it or not, your display is the cause of another con for the PlayStation, and in fact any console for that matter before the PlayStation 3. Without modifying or purchasing additional HD converter cables, the only way to get the best possible image is to utilize a CRT TV. Not a big deal for those of us who keep one around for that particular reason, but the rest of the population now has HD, Ultra HD, or even OLED TVs and monitors, and managing the space for old fat boy here is just not an option for everyone. Connecting a PS1 to a 4K display is just not a good idea, as the games will look a lot more, well, aged than you'd expect, and the end result is definitely not good for the eyes. Oh, and let's not forget about that disgusting input lag that comes with it. And the third con, and this one kind of hits home for me a little bit, is that considering the age of the hardware, you just don't know when it's going to stop working.
What happened?
I recently had that happen to the PlayStation that I owned ever since I was a kid. I was using it one day and it was flawless. And then the next time I go to use it, I plug it in and this happened. And that sound completely freaked me the f out. Not only did it sound like this particular model was manufactured in Silent Hill, but it was a clear indicator to me that something on the main system board had completely failed. And despite my research and troubleshooting, I have sadly not been able to find the cause of the problem and make repairs, both alone and with professional help. Rest in peace, old friend. Rest in peace. And now, what about the PlayStation Classic? Well, I did kind of rip into it earlier, but it still definitely has its pros. Let's start off with the size of the unit. It really is a great solution for those who are looking to save us some shelf space. And when it comes to traveling, compared to the original hardware, it is a lot more manageable to bring with you wherever you go. Whether it's on your holiday to have fun in a hotel room, or to your friend or partner's house for some traditional multiplayer action. And with the games being preloaded on the internal storage or USB thumb drive, the need to carry around the physical games is non-existent. And just like I showed earlier with a bit of tweaking, the PlayStation Classic has the potential to outperform the original hardware. Nice. Being able to add more emulators for other consoles is a really nice feature. Oh, and it even supports resolution enhancement, something that I completely forgot to showcase earlier. Now unfortunately, just like I said before, the negatives still outweigh the positives. Even though you can enhance the resolution, I completely advise against it, as the hardware here is just not powerful enough to maintain sufficient performance over time, which can then completely kill the experience. And with the image looking blurrier than it should, you may as well be playing the original hardware on a 4K TV. Now sure, we can rectify this by turning off the bilinear filter, but now, the image is just way too pixelated. Blech. And with the PlayStation Classic costing more now than what it did when it first released, paying that much for something that needs to be modified to get the best experience out of it is just not an appealing purchase. Especially when there are better and cheaper options out there that deliver the same features as a modified PlayStation Classic. Not a big deal if you already bought one when they first came out, but if you're looking at buying one today, unless you find a really good deal, I honestly wouldn't do it. And finally, we have the PC. Even on hardware as old and as weak as this, PS1 emulation overall is a much better experience on here than on something like the PlayStation Classic, delivering strong, sufficient performance, even with increased resolutions and other enhancements enabled. And unlike the PlayStation Classic, where support for other emulators stop at the Sega Dreamcast, with the PC, you can go beyond that, with the PS2, Xbox, GameCube, hell, even the PlayStation 3. There's also a hell of a lot more you can do on a PC than you can on a console, like photo and video editing, music production, relaxing with Netflix and YouTube, game streaming, the list goes on. However, ultimately, it's still a PC, and it still definitely has its fair share of cons. Even though the chances of the games you want to play not running is extremely low these days, the chance is still there, and this applies across every single emulator that is out there today. And just because a game is playable doesn't mean it won't be free from any graphical defect. For example, here's Metal Gear Solid. It doesn't matter if enhancements are enabled or disabled, or the internal resolution is increased or not, there is still a strange graphical defect that occurs in certain areas. Now this is something I can personally look past as this doesn't occur too often, although I can also understand why there are others that just cannot put up with it. And unlike the original hardware, or even the PlayStation Classic for that matter, the PC is much more prone to crashing, whether it's caused by a digital version of an STD, or a hardware aneurysm that generates the legendary blue screen of death. Now I'm not saying that consoles can't suffer from hardware failure. I mean, look at the Xbox 360 for example. All I'm saying is that over on the PC, it is much more of a regular occurrence. So if you were to ask me how I would choose to play PlayStation games going into 2023, I would honestly still choose the PC. It's a lot easier to manage all of my games in one place, offers much more flexibility, and even makes the games that we played growing up look and run exactly the way we remember it, not the pixelated and sometimes stuttery mess that we apparently experienced. Although I will say there is a special feeling about playing games on the original hardware that just cannot be replicated through any other method. And because of that, I'll still be keeping my CRT screen, and I'll still be keeping the original hardware. After all, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. But when it's all said and done, I think we can all agree on one thing. Regardless of which way we choose to play PS1 games going into the future, as long as the legacy of the legendary PlayStation 1 lives on forever. And this wraps it up. Thanks for watching guys, like the video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more future content headed your way, and be sure to give me a like and follow on my social medias, links in the video description below, and if I don't see you in the next video, I'll catch you in the ring. Game on!